It is always a somber time when speaking of the missing. State parks are seemingly a hotbed for these strange cases. It is almost as these people just up and vanish into thin air, with no trace being left behind. These cases truly stump me sometimes and leave me scratching my head. Throughout this series, I've researched cases from Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California. Today, I have landed in the Great Rocky Mountain state of Colorado. Colorado is famous worldwide not only for its marijuana cultivation, but its absolutely beautiful state parks. With 41 open and active parks in the state, it seems to make sense why so many hikers and backpackers come here to explore all Colorado's wilderness has to offer. Sadly though, not all people who come here with a sense of adventure end up leaving. Many people seem to be going missing with what local officials call strange circumstances. Whether it be the elements, wildlife, foul play, or possibly something else entirely. It is my hope that in covering these cases, that I can possibly shed more light on them. If you have a case or a state you'd like to suggest that I cover in a future video, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net or comment it down below. Number 1. Michelle Vanik, Mount of the Holy Cross. On September 24, 2005, Michelle Vanik and her friend Eric Sawyer were out hiking on the Mount of the Holy Cross, which is located in Eagle County, Colorado. The mountain they were hiking has a peak of 14,000 feet, which is definitely something that no one who isn't experienced in hiking should undertake without proper precautions or guidance. Michelle was said to have been carrying a small camelback water pack, ski poles, and some energy bars. So safe to say, she wasn't planning on being out there longer than a few hours. The two friends began their trek around 6:30 a.m. Soon after though, they had realized that they had taken a much more difficult trail than they had initially planned to. This caused the pair to move slower than they had desired. Sometime during the hike, Michelle began to fall behind Sawyer. By 1:30 p.m., she had apparently ran out of water. Sawyer claims about 400 yards away from the summit, Michelle said she couldn't go any further and that he should go without her. He said she should wait here for him to come back or to meet him at the East Cross Creek Trail to begin their descent down the mountain. About 12 minutes later, at 1:42 p.m., Sawyer reached the summit and called his wife. After only staying for a few minutes before going back to meet up with Michelle, here's where things get weird. When Sawyer goes back to where he left Michelle, she was nowhere to be found. She seemingly just ran off and has never been heard from again. For more than a week, officials held an extensive search up and down the mountain with no trace of Michelle Vanik anywhere. Officials have a few theories, but the most popular is that Michelle may have gotten injured after becoming disoriented from being dehydrated and maybe got hurt in a fall or something like that. Michelle Vanik has been missing for 13 years and left behind 4 children and a husband. It seems very strange to not just me, but locals that Eric Sawyer would just leave his friend who was apparently dehydrated. It could just be that Michelle was stubborn and didn't want any help. We may never know though. If you or anyone you know may have any information regarding Michelle Vanik's disappearance, please report it to the Eagle County Sheriff's Office. Number 2. Keith Reinhardt, Silver Plume, Colorado. Keith Reinhardt closed up his antique shop for the day and decided he was going to take a quick hike to the summit of the local Pendleton Mountain. August 7th, 1988 would seemingly be the last day anyone would ever see or hear from Keith again. Keith hiked an area with no real paths or routes carved out for the public. He had climbed the mountain before, but he had never done it without a partner, let alone all the way to the top. To make things a bit more worrisome is that Keith didn't leave until 4:30 p.m. and was reportedly not carrying any supplies on him. What makes this strange, though, is that Keith told his friends he was going to hit the summit and come back by nightfall, which just wasn't realistic, and on top of that, they claimed Keith was afraid of heights and wasn't in the best of shape either. They also said he was hungover from a party they had all had the night before. These are some pretty strong details that are sending red flags to me right now. After he never returned home, officials began a long, extensive search for Keith. For a week, officials used scent dogs, helicopters, and over 100 ground volunteers to no avail. No sign of Keith could be found anywhere. In a sequence of tragic events, one of the searchers crashed their plane during the search and passed away as well. Keith had taken a leave of absence from his job at the Daily Herald newspaper in Chicago, Illinois, where he was a sports writer and had gone to Colorado to climb mountains and write a book. He apparently left behind a family in Illinois. Police had read Keith's books and developed his films in an attempt to find any clues to his disappearance. They found nothing of interest though, which is definitely discouraging. Keith's family never believed he left on his own accord. They stated he was happy with his life and kept in regular touch with his loved ones. His wife had been planning to visit him later in August and he was looking forward to her arrival. Until this very day though, no one has seen or heard from Keith. If you or anyone you know may have any information to share, please report it to the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Department. Number 3. Alfred Beilhartz, Rocky Mountain National Park. The Beilhartz family had gone on a fishing trip on July 2nd, 1938. Alfred was just one of 10 children the family had. It was a festive time for the family as it was Independence Day. Alfred was hiking a trail with his family around Fall River when he allegedly fell behind the rest of the group. With Alfred only being 4 years old at the time, it wouldn't make much sense to leave him behind like that. After noticing Alfred wasn't with them, they went back and searched the trail, only to notice Alfred had vanished. Officials quickly came in and began a search with bloodhounds that tracked Alfred's scent 500 feet up a hill before they reached a fork in the path and seemingly lost the scent. The odd details of this case don't stop here though. A couple alleged to have seen a boy resembling Alfred crying later that day. But what makes that so weird is that they were 6 miles away and 3,000 feet higher in elevation than his family was. They claim they saw Alfred in an area known as Devil's Nest, which is near the top of Mount Chaplin. Investigators made their way up there only to find no sign of the boy anywhere. Officials searched for 10 days, exhausting their efforts with over 150 volunteers. They never found any trace of Alfred, and his case remains unsolved. Sadly, due to time constraints and the amount of time between him going missing and now, his case is no longer active. There is an odd trend with children seemingly vanishing in state parks with their families. Whether foul play or something greater is involved, it is also so sad to see a young life lost like this.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well this evening. I thought it would be fun to mix up things and discuss a few suspected missing 411 cases. As most of you know, I used to cover these types of cases fairly often. But, to be honest, I got very busy narrating and sharing all the great stories you guys send in to me. With the help of my good friend Paige Turner, I am going to be looking into missing 411 cases rather regularly again. If you have any cases you would like to suggest, leave them down in the comments below. As most of you already know, missing 411 cases are missing persons cases that meet a specific list of criteria. Aside from clusters of disappearances in one area, the victims were either alone or separated from their group when they vanished. They almost always disappeared in the mid to late afternoon hours, usually in rocky terrain or near a body of water. Weather events are also common occurrences just before or after the incident. Dogs can never find or follow a scent, and in cases where the bodies are located, it's in a previously searched location. In these instances, many victims are missing clothing articles, and medical examiners cannot determine a cause of death. I've researched 3 cases for the occasion, and if nothing else, I think you'll find the results interesting. Robert Springfield. First, I want to tell you about Robert Bugsy Springfield. He went missing on September 19, 2004, in the Bighorn Mountains. He was 48 then, and wasn't the type of person you'd expect to get lost. Robert was Native American, and his family belonged to the Crow Nation Indian Reservation in Montana. Though he was born in Casper, Wyoming, a town almost 3 hours away, he spent much of his time in the mountains, learning to hunt and live off the land. In high school, he was intelligent, popular, and athletic. He played football and basketball and even continued playing basketball for the Marines after enlisting at 17. A video by Storytelling Imperfectly stated he made it to the Special Forces, which wouldn't surprise me in the least, but there wasn't much information about his military career other than his honorable discharge in 1977. I can tell you he was well-traveled and spent a lot of time in Australia, Japan, and the Philippines, but that's about it. After his discharge, Robert enrolled at Billings Vocational Technical School and graduated in 1979. A few months later, he married his wife, Veronica, and they moved to Lodge Grass, Montana, where Robert had attended high school. Don't let these different town names confuse you either. This takes place in a single area near the Montana-Wyoming border, within a few hours of each other. The couple would go on to have 2 sons. Colton was their biological son and Brent was adopted, but they were loved and treated equally. Robert seemed to be an all-around good guy. Nothing was more important than his family, and people had great things to say about him. If he had enemies, no one could name them. Because Robert belonged to the Crow Nation, he had permission to hunt on their land, a privilege not many enjoy. He often took his sons there so they could hunt the same things he had growing up. This was an area they were intimately familiar with, and not some random patch of woods they up and decided to explore. September 19th, 2004 was a clear, windy day with mild temperatures, and Robert took his sons to Black Canyon in the Bighorn Mountains. At the time, Colton was 13 years old, and while I am not sure about Brent, I believe they are close in age. The trip into the mountains went smoothly, and the next day began like any other. They agreed to separate for the boys to drive elk into the canyon, where their father would be waiting. So Robert ventured off in the heavy woods with only a bow and some arrows for protection while his sons went their way. Both boys returned without issue that afternoon, but their father was nowhere to be seen. They waited for hours, sometimes honking the truck horn in hopes of getting his attention, but they were sure he would arrive at any moment. The idea he could be lost was simply unthinkable, but they contacted the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office and tribe members once it got dark. Soon, the mountains were swarming with infrared helicopters, dogs, and trackers on foot, and even horseback, but nothing was found. There was no sign of Robert or his gear. The search continued for weeks without any progress, and they were forced to call it off when the bad weather set in. The FBI believed foul play to be involved, but without evidence, they were powerless to act. Even though the official search was over, his family continued looking for several more weeks, but sadly, they too would be forced to accept the inevitable. A whole year passed without new information until October 2005, when a random hunter would be in the same area while trekking through a particularly dense section of forest. He heard what he thought was a woman's scream, but quickly realized it was a crow. At first, the hunter ignored it, but eventually the shrieking piqued the man's curiosity. He followed the sound to a clearing where he saw a tree that seemed to have been snapped in half by a storm. The crow was sitting on the broken stump, and the hunter claims it stopped squawking when they made eye contact. He goes on to say the bird stared at him for a moment before looking down to the fallen tree, and this caused the hunter to look in that direction. That's when he found Robert. At the base of the fallen tree were a few bones, a partial skull, a pair of boots, a rolled-up belt, and a folded jacket. His wallet still contained cash, his ID, and even his social security card, but they weren't weather damaged. Now terrified, the hunter fled the area to alert authorities. He led the sheriff back to the site, which would only be 50 yards from where Robert and his sons had made their base camp the previous year. This was not unsearched territory. All the evidence was carefully collected for testing, and considering how the items were laid out, foul play was immediately suspected. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Robert Springfield, and for a short time the FBI believed he might have been shot, but ultimately they announced the fallen tree crushed him. This conclusion did not go over well, and to even add more insult to injury, the FBI would not release the victim's body. The family was forced to sue to give Robert a proper burial. There are many issues with the falling tree theory. Let's imagine this play out. The man is down in the canyon, waiting for his sons to send the elk his way, when suddenly the tree falls. Why were his belt and other items removed if they killed him instantly? If it pinned him to the ground in a way he was able to remove them, for whatever reason, why didn't he scream for help? Falling trees can be loud, but his sons never heard a thing, and they weren't that far away. Plus, neither scenario answers why he would be separated from his weapon. The jacket could have been removed for several reasons, but the belt and boots, not so much. We could poke holes in the tree theory all day, but what actually happened? One could argue that most of his bones were taken by wildlife, but it feels like quite a stretch to say the rest of his clothes deteriorated to nothing in only a year, even exposed to the elements. Even today, this case remains a complete mystery. No one can think of a scenario that answers each question. Robert's wife wonders if he was murdered and if his body was only disposed of after the search. But that couldn't be proven either. His death certificate was finally released on November 16, 2007, and the cause of death was listed as undetermined. While most 411 cases have a prevailing theory or two, I couldn't find many for this one. When body parts are found in previously searched areas, it tends to put a kink in the usual guesswork. Some believe the crow was Robert's spirit, trying to lead the hunter to his remains, but that's about it. Though if these things were easy to figure out, we probably wouldn't be talking about them. What about you guys? Do you have any ideas? Because I would love to hear them in the comments. Tom Messick. The following case is about a hunter named Tom Messick from Troy, New York. He was an 82-year-old veteran on a hunting trip with his family, and a YouTube channel called The Lore Lodge did a pretty good documentary on it if you want to check them out later. They are friends of the channel as well, so I'd highly recommend it. At his advanced age, Tom was half blind, half deaf, and barely mobile. He could get around at home, but a hike through the woods pushed his limit to the extreme. Why was he out there, you ask? Well, family tradition. They went every single year. This year, they wanted to try a new spot and traveled to Lily Pond Road in Brant Lake, New York. It's about 2 miles from the main road, so it was isolated, but they weren't exactly in the middle of nowhere. There are houses all over the lake. People live in the area. It was already 10 a.m. when they began hunting, and much like the Springfields from our first case, these guys split up into 2 groups. There were 3 other elderly gentlemen besides Tom, and they spread out in a line roughly 100 yards apart while the 3 younger, more fit members of the group hiked around a large hill with the intent of chasing deer to their doom. Tom and the others could not see one another, but everyone was able to communicate over walkie-talkies. One notable thing that the family and friends would later recall is that the forest was silent from when they arrived to when they left. No one heard any birds, squirrels, or insects. Being experienced hunters, the party recognized this was a warning sign. But since there were 7 of them and no grizzly bears in the area, they weren't overly concerned. Aside from that detail, everything seemed completely normal. as the afternoon progressed, but they never saw a single deer. By 3 p.m., they were ready to call it quits and head back to the campsite, which was only 2 miles away from Brant Lake. Everyone immediately agreed and made their way back, but Tom didn't return. Assuming he didn't hear his walkie-talkie, they walked to where he had been hunting, but there was no sign of him or his gear. At one point, a few of the party members said they heard something they couldn't quite identify. One said it sounded like a car door being slammed, but that theory is widely discredited. There is only a tiny dirt road leading to their location, and if a vehicle had approached, it would have been heard by everyone, as would a scream or a gunshot. One of the reasons I enjoyed the Lore Lodge documentary was because those guys drove to this area and one walked 100 yards into the forest while the other stayed behind. When the first one yelled for help, he was easily heard. It's hard to imagine someone, or something, could sneak up on Tom without anyone else hearing this encounter. By 4:30, the forest rangers began the official search, and at 7, when it started to grow dark, half of the group stayed and continued looking for Tom. In contrast, the other half returned to alert his family and file a report with the authorities. The search began the next day, with 13 search and rescue professionals from the Park Service, and over the following weeks that number would rise to more than 300 from 15 agencies. Even with the assistance of divers, dogs, and helicopters, not so much as Tom's walkie-talkie was ever found. Theories began to run wild, but nothing seemed to answer every loose end. How could Tom have just wandered off if the man could barely get around? By all accounts, Tom was an experienced survivalist. His wife, Beverly, feared foul play more than anything. She was positive he wouldn't have wandered off, but even if he had, she was equally sure he would have left clues behind. He knew several things to do in such a scenario. They would have found cloth-tied strips around trees and other signs. The FBI becoming involved on the 4th day was considered unusual, since they usually don't investigate these kinds of missing cases unless it happens on federal land. They told Beverly something was not right with the case, but they weren't sure what, and to this day they have never given further elaboration. If wildlife had played a part, his possessions would have been left behind, and it's very hard to imagine a struggle took place and unnoticed unless most of all of the hunting party was in on the conspiracy, which, if they were, 6 people keeping a secret this big for this long under such scrutiny is somewhat unbelievable itself. According to one local man interviewed in the Lore Lodge documentary, there are rumors that Tom had a brother disappear in the same forest under suspiciously similar circumstances. If that is indeed true, both men could very well be in the Bahamas as we speak, but I wasn't able to find any further claims of a missing brother beyond this documentary, so I'll let you make of that what you will. Some don't believe Tom was ever in the woods, considering not one piece of evidence was left behind to place him there. But again, I find it challenging to believe 6 people would hold one lie together for this long. Given the lack of logical explanations, one can only wonder if something unnatural may have occurred. With Tom's body never being found and his possessions missing, the alternate universe theory is prevalent in this case. Thanks to Marvel, you're probably all familiar with the multiverse theory, and this is essentially the same thing. This is the belief that there's another world close to ours but different in minor yet critical ways, and sometimes it's possible for people to accidentally cross over into said universe. The Mandela effect also operates under this theory. If you think Nelson Mandela died in prison, or the Berenstain Bears have a different name, I suggest you Google that one later. The point is, the case of Tom Messick looks very much like a man who vanished into thin air. Is it possible someone is lying, and we don't know the true story? Absolutely. But given what we have, I don't know what to say. It's a tough one. Kurt Newton. Before we discuss other 411 theories, let's talk about the last case. It's the hardest. This isn't a grown man who decided to go on a hunting trip. This is a helpless 4-year-old little boy named Kurt. It takes place on August 31st, 1975, when Ronald and Jill Newton took their 2 children camping over Labor Day weekend. The family lived in Manchester, Maine, and traveled to Natness Point Campground. the Chain of Ponds Township, only a few miles away from the Maine-Quebec border. It rained a lot over the weekend, but the family didn't let that bother them. They were having a wonderful time. 3 other families were also camping in the area. They weren't the only ones out there. No one can be certain of which of the 2 witnesses were the last one to see Kurt, but sightings occurred between 10 and 11 on Sunday morning. Jill was washing his muddy shoes while Ronald collected firewood and 6-year-old Kimberly played. A neighboring camper claims to have seen the boy riding his tricycle, calling for his father, and an 11-year-old child named Llewellyn also saw him riding the trike. She asked him where his parents were, but Kurt didn't respond. Less than an hour later, Mr. Hansen, a volunteer caretaker and Llewellyn's father, discovered the small bike on a steep rise at a dump site just under a mile away. The bike wasn't damaged, and since Kurt had yet to be reported as missing, the discovery didn't raise any alarms. While this was taking place, Jill was beginning to worry. In a later interview, she said she had gone only 10 minutes when she hung Kurt's sneakers over a line and realized his tricycle was missing. At first, she thought he followed the men to collect firewood, but they returned without him. That's when she met up with Mr. Hansen and learned Kurt's bike was found at the dump site. She knew someone had taken him. Kurt had always been terrified of traveling into the forest. Kimberly loved to explore the woods behind their home in Manchester, and she often teased her brother for standing at the edge of the lawn, too frightened to venture further. They raced to the dump site, and sure enough, there was Kurt's trike, but the child was nowhere to be found. The campground owner reported Kurt missing at 12:22 that afternoon, and the most extensive search in Maine's history began. Thousands of volunteers participated. They covered a 5-mile radius of the campsite. Every road and trail were searched multiple times along with the dump site and its surrounding area. But even with helicopters and bloodhounds, there wasn't much to find. Given the muddy conditions, they expected to find the boy's footprints, but that didn't work out either. On the 31st, just before nightfall, Jill thought she heard the voice of a child in the woods near the dump, and she called out to Kurt for 15 minutes but never received an answer. Of course, there's no way to know if she just imagined it, but under the circumstances, it feels unlikely. So many resources were focused on that specific area, including the dogs, it's hard to believe he wouldn't have been found. Temperatures fell below freezing that night, and knowing the boy couldn't survive without shelter, Ronald and friends continued calling for him through sunrise without success. On that second day, dogs caught a brief scent of Kurt's pajamas, but nothing more. Unfortunately, things would only get harder for the Newton family when Ronald fell into a deep gully and hurt his ankle during the search. It turned purple and swelled up to twice its size, but he still refused to quit. After ignoring the doctor's order to rest, friends became desperate for his well-being and drugged his coffee with tranquilizers. On his 4th night without sleep, Ronald finally passed out with a loudspeaker still pressed to his lips. Many described him as the most formidable man they knew and were simply in awe of his determination. No stone was left unturned, holes large enough for a child to crawl in were dug up, the ice house next to the camping office was dismantled, and the dump was bulldozed. But still, they had nothing. The search was officially called off September 12th. While interviewing every camper, one woman claimed to have seen a white station wagon at the campground shortly before Kurt went missing. It drove away so fast it left a cloud of dust behind. No cars matching the description had been registered at the park, and no other witnesses had seen them. At the time, investigators hadn't suspected foul play. They thought the child wandered off and got lost, but Kurt's parents believed he had been abducted and possibly taken into Canada. The family remained for 2 more weeks before returning home to Manchester without their son. 2 years later, when Kurt was old enough to start school, the Newtons mailed missing posters to every school district in the country, a process that took over 6 months and cost over $5,000. While some schools responded with pictures of children resembling Kurt, they still couldn't find him. The list of possible sightings recorded is nearly endless, and though each one was investigated, Kurt was never found. In 2017, this case came back into the limelight when a woman claimed to be Jennifer Klein, a child who went missing in Utah when she was 3 years old in 1974. She said she was abducted by a satanic cult, who also was responsible for Kurt and another missing child. But obviously, this turned out This turned out to be a hoax. So I ask you, what the hell happened to this kid? If wildlife were involved, there would have been traces of blood and other obvious signs. Did he wander into a different dimension? Did someone snatch him and speed away? Considering this happened so close to the Canadian border, some question of a Wendigo could be involved. Wendigos are often mistaken for werewolves, but their hunger is insatiable, and they are always looking for their next meal. Though I fail to see how the tricycle would find its way to the dump. It could explain why Jill believed her son was in the woods that day. Wendigos are thought to mimic human voices to lure their prey into an isolated area, similar to skinwalkers. Now, we are in no way saying that a Wendigo is involved here, but this is one of the popular theories that we have found online. Missing in Yosemite, the Stacey Arras disappearance. Hey guys, I hope everyone's having a great day. But if you're not, I've got you covered. Today I'm going to be sharing a truly strange and tragic story. So sit back, relax, be sure to elbow that like button in the face, and subscribe to the channel if you're new, it helps us grow. Today's story takes us back to the summer of 1981, when 14-year-old Stacey Arras went on a guided tour in Yosemite National Park in California. She wore retainers on both her upper and lower teeth, and styled her shoulder-length blonde hair in an iconic Farrah Fawcett style. She had also attended prom with her boyfriend shortly before this trip. Despite only being 14 years old, Stacey was a known smoker. This is a judgment-free zone here. We all make questionable choices at that age, but most of us live long enough to regret them. Stacey, her father George, and 6 others took off on a 4-day trip through Yosemite's backcountry with 2 guides. The group rode horseback along the High Sierra Loop Trail at Tuolumne Meadows and arrived at the campsite on Friday afternoon, July 17th. The campsite is one of 5 within the High Sierra 49-mile loop, with each roughly a day's hike apart. There are 9 tent cabins which can accommodate up to 34 people. However, there is no running water or electricity. With the group's plan being to rest for the remainder of the day, Stacey opted to change into a t-shirt, off-white windbreaker, maroon and white shorts, and flip-flops to explore the trail with her Olympus camera. She invited her dad to join. He declined but suggested she wear hiking boots instead of flip-flops. My source material conflicts on this though. Some say she stayed in her flip-flops while others say she changed into her boots. Donning only her camera, cigarettes, and a pack of gum, Stacey heads toward one of the lakes in the area. Another hiker from the group named Gerald, an older man in his 70s, joined Stacey for about 20 to 30 minutes before stopping to rest while she continues on the trail. Back at the camp, the group's tour guide remembered noticing her standing on a rock about 50 yards south of the trail. If Stacey was headed to Sunrise Lake, which was the nearest lake and exactly a mile away, she would have made it to the lake in about an hour, probably less. I think this is most likely the location Stacey would have gone. It is very picturesque and accessible by simply following the trail. Maps show other bodies of water in the area. However, in the summer months, they likely wouldn't have even existed. They probably would have been dried up. A few hours later, another group of hikers approached the campsite and were asked if they had seen a girl matching Stacey's description, but they had not. At this point, her father, the tour group, and the staff from the High Sierra camp began scouting the area looking for Stacey. They contacted the park authorities and searched well into the night but were unsuccessful. The next morning, an official search by the National Park Service began. The search party included around 100 people and was comprised of volunteers, search and rescue members, and national park employees. Yosemite National Park consists of 1,200 square miles, but the search grid was 5 square miles around the campsite. The grid was established by the natural barriers in the area such as cliffs, ravines, and large rivers, as well as the reasonable distance they believed 14-year-old Stacey could have gone since she was last seen. Searchers were paid $4 an hour, which equates to about $13 an hour today, and rock climbers were paid $10 an hour, which would be about $30 to $65 an hour today. Half were paid searchers and half were unpaid volunteers. 3 helicopters also assisted in the 11-day search. Park officials reported the total cost of the effort to be about $55,000. To put this into perspective, that is close to $180,000 today. The Gabby Petito case, which was extremely high profile and searched over several months, took a full year to reach $180,000 in police payroll. Unlike the Gabby Petito case, sadly, Stacey Arras has never been found. 11 days may not seem like a very long time to search, but all reports suggest searches and team members were very detailed. The area Stacey went missing, Tuolumne Meadows, is the largest elevation meadow in the Sierra Nevada at 8,600 feet. Data for the temperatures in this area in 1981 are not exact. However, due to this altitude and time of year, temperatures can range from 90 degrees during the day to as low as 47 degrees at night. If she were lost or hurt stuck somewhere in that 5-mile radius, she should have been heard or found in those 11 days. Remember, Stacey was in a windbreaker and shorts. Temperatures at night would have been absolutely miserable for her. One volunteer brought a German Shepherd dog to aid in the search. However, nothing was found. German Shepherds, according to the handler, are best at tracking humans in general, whereas bloodhounds are the type of dogs you would give a specific scent sample to, and they could track the scent as you see in the movies. From what I can tell, no bloodhounds or cadaver dogs have been brought to the site, which is a huge miss for investigators. Hopes for finding Stacey Arras alive are not high, but her family deserves to know what happened. Cadaver dogs are able to pick up a scent within minutes of the death or even years later. In some studies, they have found 25-year-old skeletonized remains. Cadaver dogs were first used by Connecticut police in the 1980s, so it is reasonable that the Park Service would be aware and be able to find a cadaver dog handler willing to explore the area. Had the Park Service utilized these tactics in the late 80s, hell, even in the early or even late 90s, they may have had a chance of locating her body. Again, I think this is a huge mistake by investigators and calls into question if the right people were put in place to even solve this case. Now, this is where things get especially frustrating. There are some big inconsistencies in the reporting of this case. First, some reports say Stacey's lens cap was found inside the tree line by the lake, but Park Superintendent Robert Benuiz says not a single clue was found. And another National Park Service ranger, Bob Johnson, said nothing significant was found as well. So which is it? If the lens cap was found, that would give us confirmation Stacey had at least made it to the area. Surely everyone would consider that a clue. If they didn't find it, well, that is even more alarming, so many reported it as found, without a single source to confirm it. Second is Gerald Stewart, the last person to interact with Stacey. He was the elderly gentleman in his 70s who accompanied her for the first 20 to 30 minutes of her walk. I say in his 70s because reports give his age anywhere from 72 to 77. Missing his age by a few years may not seem significant, but his name was withheld until years later. Nothing in the source material points to Gerald being a suspect, so why wasn't his name given? Or if his identity was to be shielded, why not just say that? How can we be sure that he was vetted properly if his age wasn't even accurate? Now, surely a healthy 14-year-old Stacey could defend herself from a man in his 70s at 5'5" and 120 pounds. She could have at least drawn attention or left behind evidence of a struggle. I don't believe Gerald to be involved. However, the details of his age and name being incorrect in the reporting of this case with so few details leaves me questioning the thoroughness of this investigation. So, with that in mind, let's talk more about the investigation, or lack thereof. In addition to the 11-day search effort, the Park Service distributed missing posters of Stacey throughout the park. The first thing to rule out is Stacey being a runaway. Don't forget this is the 1980s, a time when all police reports act as if all missing children must be runaways because why else would they disappear? Officials do seem to have looked into this, citing that Stacey was having some family or school troubles, but she was 14. What 14-year-old isn't having family or school troubles? She was also said to be missing her boyfriend. Okay, sure, totally normal, but that's no indication that she ran off to meet him or to some sort of public phone. Remember, cell phones were something only thought of in sci-fi TV shows at this point in time. Ultimately, between wearing flip-flops, inviting her dad to accompany her to the lake, then a fellow group member, and the lack of belief from family she would run away based on these family and school troubles, officials do not believe Stacey ran away on her own accord. Besides this, the National Park Service doesn't seem especially forthcoming with their information. Documents released by the park mostly include short newspaper articles, pictures of Stacey provided by the family, copies of the missing poster used around the park, and a few letters written between Park Service departments regarding Stacey's search. Visitors are supposed to get a permit to use the backcountry, and we know investigators used these wilderness permits to determine which hikers were in the area at the time of Stacey's disappearance. These hikers were contacted to find potential witnesses, but we have no idea if these efforts yielded useful information or if they even spoke to anyone. The Fresno Bee reported foul play has not been ruled out per a park official after the intense 11-day search was called off. Park Superintendent Benuiz added the Park Service would still like to hear from any backpacker who may have been in the area at the time. Investors and journalists have submitted Freedom of Information Acts, or FOIAs, for the files, but all requests have been denied. Why? A denial response to the FOIA request says the requested records were withheld in accordance with Exemption 7A of FOIA exemption. 7A is basically to protect information for law enforcement purposes to protect the investigation or possible trial. But this makes absolutely no sense. Stacey Arras has been missing for 41 years. What could possibly be in those files that shouldn't be released? Her family deserves to know all of the information available, and they haven't seen them either. Does the National Park Service really consider this case open? If so, how? There appears to be no genuine movement or investigation that I can find. Researching this case had brought to light a disturbing fact. The federal government does not track the number of missing persons in national parks. Let me say that again. The federal government does not track the number of missing persons in national parks. Experts believe that at least 1,600 individuals go missing while visiting national parks throughout the United States. Seems like quite a lot of disappearances that the National Park Service would like to keep track of, right? We know the Park Service is inefficient, and at the time, communication across departments was particularly poor. Just the week before Stacey's disappearance, flights for water sampling were taking place in the area. One of the memos in the files is from Chief Ranger for Administrative Flights Charles W. Wendt. Chief Ranger Wendt wrote to the superintendent about these flights as no itinerary was provided to know where they would be and when. There was no memorandum in place which requested prior approval for all administrative flights, which the sampling team did not adhere to. Had these flights been in the area at the time of Stacey Arras' aerial search crew, lives could have been lost. I am empathetic to the time. Electronic communication was nothing like it is today, and records weren't digitized. I can understand the difficulty in keeping track of statistics without the aid of electronic reporting. But with today's technology, this is downright unacceptable. Okay, let's talk theories. First things first, we are talking about the wilderness, so let's discuss wild animals. Of course, animals could be a possibility. Yosemite has lots of wildlife someone could come across. Rattlesnakes, bobcats, black bears, coyotes, mountain lions, and more are all known to live in the park. Alright, black bears. They're the biggest on this list and the one I would be most afraid to run into. However, there are no reports of anyone being killed or seriously injured by a bear in Yosemite. That doesn't mean this doesn't happen though. These bears are pretty leery of people, but happy to steal your food. In fact, the same is true for most of these animals. Bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions are unlikely to attack as long as you keep your distance and don't provoke them. Most importantly though, had any of these attacked Stacey, there would undoubtedly be evidence left behind. We would have blood, clothes, jewelry, her camera, or bones if she were the victim of an animal attack. For this reason, I feel it's pretty safe we can rule out the animal theory. But like I said, nothing can be ruled out entirely. Yosemite has lots of ledges, crevices, and slippery areas. It's entirely possible Stacey slipped or got hurt, but I can't help think she would have been found in the search or by one of the many park visitors in later years. Again, had cadaver dogs been used, we could rule this out with more certainty. Other theories believe Stacey's disappearance could be the result of something supernatural. Stacey seemingly disappeared without a trace, which leaves the door open for an alien or some sort of other supernatural speculation. But I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. While more than a few serial killers have been known to use national parks for their business, no known serial killers were active in the area at the time of Stacey's disappearance, though the possibility of her being abducted cannot be ruled out. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In fact, the lack of evidence in this case is what makes it so mystifying. It is not impossible that it was a crime of opportunity. carried out by an organized killer with access to resources that allowed them to buy time or hide and destroy evidence? Could this be a National Park Service member, or someone in the park's system protecting someone else? This would explain the absence of evidence and the lack of transparency on this case. Why else would anybody withhold information on a 40-year-old case? Why not allow someone else to try their hand? Jurisdiction for crimes like this are automatically federal, meaning the local law enforcement have no authority to work the case unless requested. Crimes that take place on federal lands within National Park Service can be handed over to the FBI, but as far as I can tell, their help was never requested, nor was help from local law enforcement. Is the National Park Service protecting a killer, or just their ego? I know what many are probably asking at this point in the story. So, Swamp Dweller, what else can be done? We know so little, and the few facts we have in this case conflict, but there are some avenues that still can be explored. This case needs to be examined by an experienced cold case detective. We need all the information regarding the Stacey Arras case to be made available. Divers should search the Sunrise Lake for Stacey's possessions or remains. There has also been no mention of this occurring, and again I have to ask why. If finding a missing 14-year-old girl isn't a priority worth shelling out funding for, what is? While the lake certainly isn't small, an effort could be made with just a few searchers to cover that water rather quickly. There is so much that could be hidden in that body of water, just waiting to be uncovered. If Stacey's remains could be found, there is a chance that she could be identified. Forensics have changed drastically since 1981. Samples from Stacey's close relatives would allow investigators to run a search against all open Jane Doe cases throughout the United States. If Stacey was abducted or ran away by choice, she could be anywhere in the world. She might have descendants we don't know about. Forensic genealogy could also be used to compare her relatives' DNA to a public database such as GEDmatch to find unknown descendants. If you've used any take-home DNA kits, you can upload your DNA profile to GEDmatch and opt in for it to be used with these types of searches. You never know, it could be you that helps identify a Jane or John Doe who would never have found their way home. If you have any information regarding the Stacey Arras case, you can call or text the National Park Service tip line or submit a tip on their website at nps.gov. Bobby Bisup, missing from cabin camp St. Malo. The disappearance of Bobby Bisup is a tragic and mysterious case. In 1958, 10-year-old Bobby Bisup went fishing in Cabin Creek at Camp St. Malo, a Catholic boys' camp. A counselor named Terry Cohen informed Bobby that it was time for dinner, and Bobby nodded to indicate that he understood. However, within an hour, the camp realized that Bobby was missing. Despite extensive search efforts by numerous counselors, Bobby could not be found. The camp's director, Reverend Richard Heister, notified Bobby's parents and a U.S. Forest Ranger station about the disappearance. Unfortunately, Bobby remained missing for over a year. In July 1959, Bobby Bisup's remains were discovered just below the timberline. Identification was made through scraps of clothing, bones, and fragments of a child's hearing aid, indicating that it was indeed Bobby's body because he did indeed use hearing aids. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance and subsequent death remained unclear at the time. In 2021, a skull believed to belong to Bobby Bisup was turned over to federal authorities by a man named Dr. Tom McCloskey. Dr. McCloskey revealed that he had been in possession of the item via his father, Dr. Joseph McCloskey, who was a prominent member of the Catholic Church and a close friend of the priest running Camp St. Malo when Bobby vanished. Dr. Tom McCloskey inherited the skull in 1980 after his father's death, and upon seeing a documentary called Mystery on Mount Meeker, he decided to contact federal authorities. The documentary, Mystery on Mount Meeker, produced by WBIR's 9 Wants to Know, shed light on the case and raised questions about the sequence of events when Bobby disappeared. It revealed that 3 camp counselors went on to abuse children as priests, suggesting a disturbing connection. DNA testing on the skull is underway to determine if it does belong to Bobby Bisup. The investigation aims to uncover the truth about what happened to Bobby and potentially shed light on the circumstances surrounding his disappearance and death. It is a tragic and complex case to say the least, and without further information or the DNA testing results, it is truly difficult to answer what exactly happened to Bobby Bisup. The investigation and analysis of evidence will hopefully bring closure and answers to this long-standing mystery, and I will be sure to make an update video as soon as I see more information. Robert Bissell, Roaring River Wilderness Area. On a fateful day in July 2010, 57-year-old Robert Bissell embarked on a solo camping trip to the remote Roaring River Wilderness area. Known as a seasoned backpacker and outdoor enthusiast, Bissell sought the tranquility and solitude of nature while indulging in his passion for fishing. Leaving his home in Portland, Oregon, he filed a wilderness use permit with the U.S. Forest Service, stating his expected return date of July 16th. Little did anyone know that this would be the last time Robert Bissell would ever be seen. Driving his white 1989 Nissan Sentra with Oregon license plates, Bissell parked at Trailhead 700 near Rock Lakes. From there, he hiked approximately 5 miles to establish his campsite off Trail 512 near Middle Rock Lake. Strangely, it appeared that he only intended to be away for a day or two, as he left behind his sleeping bag and gear, taking only his fishing rod and tackle. Concern arose when Bissell's brother visited the campsite on July 19th and July 24th, finding no trace of him. The Clackamas County Sheriff Search and Rescue Team was alerted, and on the morning of July 25th, 2010, an extensive search operation was launched. The search efforts encompassed the Roaring River Wilderness, Rock Lakes Basin, and the surrounding trail system and lakes including Serene Lake, Shining Lake, and Shell Rock Lake. Reports from fellow campers indicated that they had encountered Robert at the beginning of his trip, approximately 20 miles southeast of Estacada. Bissell had left a note detailing his itinerary, providing a glimpse into his plans and thought process. Searchers hypothesized that he had set up camp and then embarked on a day hike to fish in the Rock Lakes Basin area, given that his fishing gear was missing. The area was known for its abundant trout population, making it an ideal fishing spot. To aid in the search, flyers were distributed in campgrounds, trailheads, ranger stations, and the nearby town of Estacada, appealing for any information that could assist in locating Robert Bissell. Sergeant James Rhodes of the Clackamas County Search and Rescue Unit considered the possibility that Bissell may have sustained an injury during his trek in the challenging terrain of the Mount Hood National Forest. However, the relatively cool temperatures at the time were not expected to pose an immediate threat of hypothermia. Despite the deployment of hundreds of volunteers and 60 to 70 professional searchers, as well as the utilization of helicopters, search dogs, mounted horse patrols, and other resources, no sign of Robert Bissell was ever discovered. The search teams worked diligently, adhering to standard search and rescue procedures. They ventured into new areas, calling out and blowing whistles, hoping for a response that never came. Throughout the operation, various items thought to belong to Bissell were found, but none were able to be confirmed upon examination. In addition, other campers were interviewed who had apparently interacted with Robert during his camp setup. Curiously, Bissell's clothing and fishing gear were never located. It was as if he had just vanished without a trace, leaving unanswered questions and a sense of mystery. The extensive search efforts were officially concluded on August 3, 2010, without indicating Robert Bissell's whereabouts. The rough and unforgiving terrain of the Mount Hood National Forest presented numerous challenges, even causing search horses to lose their shoes. Ronald Scott Gray, Selway Wilderness Region. Massachusetts hunter Ronald S. Gray vanished without a trace over 7 years ago during a fall hunting expedition in the rugged Selway area of Idaho, near Kooskia. Despite an extensive month-long search by ground and air teams, the 62-year-old hunter from Essex County was never located. There seems to be a semblance of closure as Nancy Gray, his widow, recently petitioned the court to declare her missing husband legally deceased. A specific date for the hearing on the petition is yet to be determined. Ronald Gray, a retired Massachusetts State Police major, was an enthusiastic outdoorsman and a former U.S. Marine combat veteran who had served in Vietnam. According to court records, his last communication was via radio on September 19, 2008, stating that he was at Highline Lakes and planned to return to his companion's outfitters camp at Outer Butte by September 23rd. It was common for Gray to embark on solo hunting trips for multiple days, occasionally surpassing his intended return date. When he failed to return by September 26th, his disappearance was reported to the Idaho County Sheriff's Office. The search efforts involved a collaboration between personnel from Idaho and Clearwater counties, Hillcrest Aviation, and the Idaho Army National Guard. Despite their combined efforts, no trace of Gray was ever discovered. However, a fanny pack containing some of his personal belongings was found at Highline Lake. The search spanned a vast and challenging terrain covering approximately 1,000 square miles, ranging in elevation from 2,000 to 7,000 feet. Unfortunately, the search had to be suspended on October 14th due to worsening weather conditions. The total cost of the search operation remains undisclosed, but the helicopter services alone amounted to around $20,000, with contributions of $1,975 made by the Gray family and friends. In an affidavit submitted to the district court in Grangeville, Nancy Gray expressed her profound shock at her husband's unexpected disappearance, stating, "Ron has always been very upbeat and looking forward to the next adventure." She could never have foreseen that his hunting trip in Idaho in 2008 would mark his final endeavor. Nancy's petition to declare her husband legally deceased is handled by attorney Victoria Olds, based in Grangeville. You can find more information about this online or at the Charlie Project. Manami Shinamura. Case takes us to Hirogano Kogen Campground in Gujo, Japan. With just under 40 acres, it's the largest campsite in Gujo, and it has beautiful bungalows, cottages, and even a mountain villa. A post made to the Unsolved Mysteries subreddit details the tragic case of Manami Shinamura, a 10-year-old girl who disappeared while on a school outing with multiple chaperones and 84 of her 5th grade classmates. She had expressed her excitement for the trip to her big sister Akumi just the night before. Manami was the youngest of her 3 sisters who were raised by their single mother, Masuyo, and I was unable to find many details about her father. By all accounts, Manami was a sweet girl with a bright, cheerful personality who loved to sing and dance despite having endured many struggles in her short life. She was born with a heart condition that required surgery, and she had Down syndrome. Her poor health left her much smaller than the other children, and she required adult assistance with everyday tasks. That isn't to say she was lonely. Manami enjoyed going to school, and she had plenty of friends in her class. Her mother also stated she was very aware of her special needs and knew better than to wander off on her own, yet she never returned from her field trip. On July 23, 2009, the large group from Tokoname-nishi Elementary School arrived at the campground, where they planned to stay for 3 days. While there, the campsite was closed to the public, giving the children free rein to experience nature to its fullest during their outdoor classes. The first night went off without a hitch, but day 2 is when things took a tragic turn. Sometime between 7:30 and 8 on the morning of July 24th, the school principal witnessed Manami and 4 friends passing by on their way to preview some test or demonstrations scheduled for later that evening. Different sources translate exactly what this activity was, but the principal noted that Manami was lagging behind the group. And though he found the sight concerning, he chose not to follow. It was only a short time later when her friends returned without her, claiming she had vanished. The path they were on formed a loop. All you had to do was just simply follow it, and you would return to the starting point. But if she went off trail,
danger lurked in practically every direction. There was a paved road nearby, the eastern slope had cliffs that even adults couldn't climb, and there was a stream to the west. It said the water was shallow at that time of year, but, as we all know, water doesn't have to be that deep for someone to drown. When teachers failed to locate Manami, the police were called and hundreds of volunteers came to assist in the search efforts. They were told to look for a little girl wearing a red name tag, light pink trousers, light blue athletic shoes, and a long-sleeved t-shirt with blue sleeves and a rabbit pictured on a white background. Her hair was in pigtails, and she was estimated to be about 3'9". Unfortunately, though, no trace of the little girl was ever found. There were no footprints, and none of her belongings have ever turned up. The lack of blood and fur quickly ruled out any sort of animal attack, and investigators were stumped as to how a small girl could go so far in such a little amount of time. When the official search efforts were officially called off, Manami's mother continued looking for her on her own for multiple months after. It's rumored a pair of shoes similar to her daughter's were found, but police determined they were not an exact match. The most popular theory behind the young girl's disappearance is that she simply fell behind the other classmates and wandered off into the wilderness. She wouldn't have been able to fend for herself in such a harsh environment, even if she avoided contact with wild animals altogether. The likelihood of finding safe food and water were practically non-existent. What I don't really understand is that if she was as frail as described, how did she wander off in the first place? Had she tried to venture off, or if the other children had dared her to do something dangerous, wouldn't she need to stop often to rest? Yet, somehow she eluded hundreds of searchers. Is it possible someone snuck into the campground despite being closed to the public? Everyone knew that only students and teachers were allowed. If someone else were there, they would have needed to escape detention completely. Or, well, I sure would love to know more about that principal, Hiroki Sawada. What if he did follow little Manami when he saw her trailing behind her friends? There are simply too many questions and not enough answers, much like our next case. Saiia Manami. The disappearance I want to discuss took place in Matsudo, a city in Chiba Prefecture. Our focus is on 7-year-old first grader named Saiia Manami. So, yeah, she coincidentally shares a name with the previous victim, but don't let it confuse you too much. On September 23rd of 2022, so very recently, Saiia and her mother planned to visit a park near their home. They usually walk together, but on this particular Friday afternoon, Saiia left the house alone, with nothing but her pink scooter at 11:30. According to Japan Times, her mother followed behind her about 5 minutes later, but by then it was already far too late. Saiia was nowhere to be found. Her height is estimated to be just over 3.5 feet tall. She has short black hair, and she was last seen wearing a pale pink t-shirt, blue shorts, and pink sneakers. Japan is known for its low crime rate, especially against children. So the case quickly received national attention as volunteers poured over the streets in search for the missing girl. Security cameras showed her within 900 meters of the park that she intended to meet her mother at before surveillance footage lost sight of her. She was riding her scooter at the time, but later that day, the scooter was discovered in a different park in the neighboring city, Nagarayama. I felt this to be a strong indication of foul play, which was only fueled further the next morning when her socks and shoes were found on the banks of the Edo River over 300 yards away from that park. Crimes against children are simply that uncommon in their society. What does it say about our own that a predator is our first and only assumption? Saiia's parents had previously searched the area where her socks and shoes were found, and they were certain the items were not there before. They could have been mistaken, of course. Air and water searches were also conducted, and teachers from Saiia's school helped canvass the area, but no further signs of the missing girl were ever discovered that day. On Monday, her principal explained the tragic news in a school assembly, and a few days later, Saiia's hat was found over a half a mile further downstream from where her shoes had been found. The hat had her name on it, and her parents appealed to the public for any information regarding their missing daughter. Tragically, it wasn't long after that everyone's worst fears were confirmed. Sources are unclear on when, but sometime around September 27th, a child's body was found in the Edo River. After a typhoon passed through central Japan, a cyclist discovered a small floating body and called the authorities. The discovery was made just over 9 miles away from where Saiya's socks and shoes were located. Obviously, investigators' first thoughts were of the little girl. Even their clothes were similar, but they waited for DNA confirmation before making the official announcement on October 4th. An autopsy concluded that most likely the cause of death was to be that of drowning. No major injuries were visible, and her time of death was placed between 1 to 2 weeks prior. A memorial was started near the site where mourners were able to bring flowers and small gifts. Whether Saiya was suspected of running off or kidnapped remains unconfirmed by authorities, but it left the community too frightened to let their children go out alone for some time. It almost makes you wonder if those low crime statistics stem from the unwillingness to admit when certain cases have nefarious elements. Aside from her scooters somehow making it to an entirely different park, and the fact that her parents didn't initially see the clothing articles by the river, her parents also insist Saiya hated getting her feet wet, and that she was not a big fan of water. She wouldn't have left her socks and shoes placed off to the side so neatly. Oh, and in case if you are wondering how Saiya's mother could have let her walk to the park alone in the first place, again, it's really not that uncommon in Japan. Children even go shopping alone when the stores are close enough. Which, I mean, it's Japan, the stores are usually close enough. Matsudo City even boasts itself as one of the top places nationwide to raise a child, so this tragedy was particularly shocking for the residents. There's a missing 411 phenomenon in Japan, oftenly known as Jahatsu, which roughly translate to the evaporated people. If you aren't familiar with this term, I'll save it as a surprise, but I'm willing to bet it's not what you think it is. It seems, no matter where you are in the world, whether it's North America or even Japan, the missing 411 type phenomenon continues to grow. Don't forget to slap that like button like the homeless alligator who owes you $15, subscribe if you're new as it helps the channel grow, and get ready for the Japanese missing 411, aka the evaporated people. Manami Shinamura. Our first case takes us to Hirogano Kogen Campground in Gujo, Japan. With just under 40 acres, it's the largest campsite in Gujo, and it has beautiful bungalows, cottages, and even a mountain villa. A post made to the Unsolved Mysteries subreddit details the tragic case of Manami Shinamura, a 10-year-old girl who disappeared while on a school outing with multiple chaperones and 84 of her 5th grade classmates. She had expressed her excitement for the trip to her big sister Akumi just the night before. Manami was the youngest of her 3 sisters who were raised by their single mother, Masuyo, and I was unable to find many details about her father. By all accounts, Manami was a sweet girl with a bright, cheerful personality who loved to sing and dance despite having endured many struggles in her short life. She was born with a heart condition that required surgery, and she had Down syndrome. Her poor health left her much smaller than the other children, and she required adult assistance with everyday tasks. That isn't to say she was lonely. Manami enjoyed going to school, and she had plenty of friends in her class. Her mother also stated she was very aware of her special needs and knew better than to wander off on her own, yet she never returned from her field trip. On July 23, 2009, the large group from Tokoname-nishi Elementary School arrived at the campground, where they planned to stay for 3 days. While there, the campsite was closed to the public, giving the children free rein to experience nature to its fullest during their outdoor classes. The first night went off without a hitch, but day 2 is when things took a tragic turn. Sometime between 7:30 and 8 on the morning of July 24th, the school principal witnessed Manami and 4 friends passing by on their way to preview some test or demonstration scheduled for later that evening. Different sources translate exactly what this activity was, but the principal noted that Manami was lagging behind the group. And though he found the sight concerning, he chose not to follow. It was only a short time later when her friends returned without her, claiming she had vanished. The path they were on formed a loop. All you had to do was just simply follow it, and you would return to the starting point. But if she went off trail, danger lurked in practically every direction. There was a paved road nearby, the eastern slope had cliffs that even adults couldn't climb, and there was a stream to the west. It said the water was shallow at that time of year, but, as we all know, water doesn't have to be that deep for someone to drown. When teachers failed to locate Manami, the police were called and hundreds of volunteers came to assist in the search efforts. They were told to look for a little girl wearing a red name tag, light pink trousers, light blue athletic shoes, and a long-sleeved t-shirt with blue sleeves and a rabbit pictured on a white background. Her hair was in pigtails, and she was estimated to be about 3'9". Unfortunately, though, no trace of the little girl was ever found. There were no footprints, and none of her belongings have ever turned up. The lack of blood and fur quickly ruled out any sort of animal attack, and investigators were stumped as to how a small girl could go so far in such a little amount of time. When the official search efforts were officially called off, Manami's mother continued looking for her on her own for multiple months after. It's rumored a pair of shoes similar to her daughter's were found, but police determined they were not an exact match. The most popular theory behind the young girl's disappearance is that she simply fell behind the other classmates and wandered off into the wilderness. She wouldn't have been able to fend for herself in such a harsh environment, even if she avoided contact with wild animals altogether. The likelihood of finding safe food and water were practically non-existent. What I don't really understand is that if she was as frail as described, how did she wander off in the first place? Had she tried to venture off, or if the other children had dared her to do something dangerous, wouldn't she need to stop often to rest? Yet, somehow she eluded hundreds of searchers. Is it possible someone snuck into the campground despite being closed to the public? Everyone knew that only students and teachers were allowed. If someone else were there, they would have needed to escape detention completely. Or, well, I sure would love to know more about that principal, Hiroki Sawada. What if he did follow little Manami when he saw her trailing behind her friends? There are simply too many questions and not enough answers, much like our next case. Saiia Manami. The second disappearance I want to discuss took place in Matsudo, a city in Chiba Prefecture. Our focus is on 7-year-old first grader named Saiia Manami. So, yeah, she coincidentally shares a name with the previous victim, but don't let it confuse you too much. On September 23rd of 2022, so very recently, Saiia and her mother planned to visit a park near their home. They usually walk together, but on this particular Friday afternoon, Saiia left the house alone with nothing but her pink scooter at 11:30. According to Japan Times, her mother followed behind her about 5 minutes later, but by then it was already far too late. Saiia was nowhere to be found. Her height is estimated to be just over 3.5 feet tall. She has short, black hair, and she was last seen wearing a pale pink t-shirt, blue shorts, and pink sneakers. Japan is known for its low crime rate, especially against children. So the case quickly received national attention as volunteers poured over the streets in search for the missing girl. Security cameras showed her within 900 meters of the park that she intended to meet her mother at before surveillance footage lost sight of her. She was riding her scooter at the time, but later that day, the scooter was discovered in a different park in the neighboring city, Nagarayama. I felt this to be a strong indication of foul play, which was only fueled further the next morning when her socks and shoes were found on the banks of the Edo River over 300 yards away from that park. Crimes against children are simply that uncommon in their society. What does it say about our own that a predator is our first and only assumption? Saiia's parents had previously searched the area where her socks and shoes were found, and they were certain the items were not there before. They could have been mistaken, of course. Air and water searches were also conducted, and teachers from Saiia's school helped canvass the area, but no further signs of the missing girl were ever discovered that day. On Monday, her principal explained the tragic news in a school assembly, and a few days later, Saiya's hat was found over a half a mile further downstream from where her shoes had been found. The hat had her name on it, and her parents appealed to the public for any information regarding their missing daughter. Tragically, it wasn't long after that everyone's worst fears were confirmed. Sources are unclear on when, but sometime around September 27th, a child's body was found in the Edo River. After a typhoon passed through central Japan, a cyclist discovered a small floating body and called the authorities. The discovery was made just over 9 miles away from where Saiya's socks and shoes were located. Obviously, investigators' first thoughts were of the little girl. Even their clothes were similar, but they waited for DNA confirmation before making the official announcement on October 4th. An autopsy concluded that most likely the cause of death was to be that of drowning. No major injuries were visible, and her time of death was placed between 1 to 2 weeks prior. A memorial was started near the site where mourners were able to bring flowers and small gifts. Whether Saiya was suspected of running off or kidnapped remains unconfirmed by authorities, but it left the community too frightened to let their children go out alone for some time. It almost makes you wonder if those low crime statistics stem from the unwillingness to admit when certain cases have nefarious elements. Aside from her scooters somehow making it to an entirely different park, and the fact that her parents didn't initially see the clothing articles by the river, her parents also insist Saiya hated getting her feet wet, and that she was not a big fan of water. She wouldn't have left her socks and shoes placed off to the side so neatly. Oh, and in case if you are wondering how Saiya's mother could have let her walk to the park alone in the first place, again, it's really not that uncommon in Japan. Children even go shopping alone when the stores are close enough. Which, I mean, it's Japan, the stores are usually close enough. Matsudo City even boasts itself as one of the top places nationwide to raise a child, so this tragedy was particularly shocking for the residents. Mount Meissen. For our final case, we are going to switch things up a bit and leave off on a happy ending. This one takes us to Mount Meissen in Tenkawa, a village in the Nara prefecture, at over 1,600 feet above sea level. Mount Meissen is the highest peak of Miyajima Island. There are a number of Buddhist structures near the summit, along with a spectacular view of the Seto Inland Sea and Hiroshima City. Last August, 2 unnamed elderly women became lost in the fog on Mount Meissen. The 61-year-old was from Nagoya, and the 69-year-old was from Ichinomiya. Luckily, the women had submitted a climbing notification to Tenkawa Village before beginning their hike. Always tell people where you're going, folks. It saves lives. Nobody plans to get lost. Things just happen. But don't be that person, okay? Sources state that the women began their journey at noon on August 4th and stayed at the lodge for the first night. The next morning, they left at 8 with intentions of being back in the village guest house that night. Thankfully, when the women missed their reservation, the proprietor alerted authorities. Police and the fire department launched their search on August 6th, and their efforts continued for 5 full days without success before the search was officially canceled. Any hopes of finding the women alive were long gone by the evening of August 13th, but that's when the police received a shocking call. At 6:30, one of the women reached out for help. She was alone on a mountain ridge, having left her friend behind in a desperate attempt to hike back to the village. Luckily, she found reception first. Authorities were able to pinpoint her location with GPS, and on that morning of August 14th, 12 hours after the phone call, she was found over 3.5 miles south of Tenkawa Village. 3 hours later, the other woman was also found and rescued nearby. In an interview, the Nagoya woman stated that they were on their way down the mountain when they became lost in a thick fog. They happened upon a structure with a roof where they took shelter and built a fire. They were able to stay hydrated with water from a nearby stream, and they rationed their snack foods as well as they could. But their food supply inevitably ran low. That's why she resumed walking on the morning of August 13th while her friend stayed behind due to exhaustion. She knew that they would both die slow, painful deaths if she did not find a way to call out for help. Relying on her phone's compass and a downloaded map, she had started heading north in the direction of Tenkawa Village. When she was finally able to dial emergency services, her battery was on 20%. The interview ends with a quote from the woman stating, "I feel bad about causing trouble to a lot of people. I should have had the courage to turn back along the way." The important thing is that both women survived, and with only minor cuts and scrapes. When you hear 2 elderly women were stranded in the wilderness for 10 days, you expect a fairly tragic ending. Well, I guess that does it for this case too. Are you ready for a bonus topic though? Because we have a little bit more to talk about. The evaporated people. It's time to discuss those evaporated people I was telling you about. Lena Mager, a French journalist, wrote a book about the phenomenon. It's called The Vanished, and it's used as a source for many articles discussing the situation, including a Time magazine article from May 2017 that I found absolutely fascinating. It said each year, nearly 100,000 Japanese citizens vanish without a trace, and because this number will come into question, I wanted to check that number with additional sources. The Missing Persons Search Support Association of Japan is a non-profit organization that provides support to the families of evaporated people. The organization's website claims the actual unregistered number is estimated at several times 100,000. Now, moving on. American and Japanese culture are vastly different from one another in so many obvious ways that it's easy to overlook some of the, let's say, hidden consequences of those differences. Due to their tendency to be so polite and proper, the Japanese can come across as an overall happy and well-composed and successful society, but that's simply not the case. I mean, in a lot of cases, it is, but by no means can it be used to describe them as a whole. Many people suffer from depression and crack under the pressure of life, just like the rest of us. They too are susceptible to things like addiction, mental illness, and debt. The major difference is how their society perceives what many would consider to be quote-unquote failure, whereas we may label similar situations as just going through a rough patch. They may very well see it as something more akin to the end of one's life. The pressure to maintain a strict facade can carry a crushing weight that all of us probably can relate to in one way or another. Takahiko Kariya is a professor at the Sociology of Japanese Society at Oxford University's Nissan Institute. He explained that even though people do go missing in every country, there are factors that make the evaporated people phenomenon more likely to occur in Japan. In the last couple of decades, schools have begun to nurture creativity and individual expression, while the social structuring of the workplace has remained relatively unchanged. Basically, this means graduates are in for a rude awakening when they enter the real world and are expected to conform to a corporate ideal. Apparently, it's fairly standard for most employees to work 80 hours a week, and their vacation time has been on a steady decline. Now, you might think, so what, quit and find a better job? But they can't even do that really. It is considered shameful to quit one's company. Sometimes, it's literally easier to fake your own death and start over anew than it is to face a feeling of such shame and humiliation. Those who are successful are often called the nameless. Of course, part of the reason they are said to be successful is that they have formed their own subculture. Lena Mager is quoted as saying, "It's something you can't really talk about, but people can disappear because there's another society underneath Japan's society." The article goes on to tell of a story of a man called Nori Hiro. He was fired from his engineering job, but too ashamed to tell his family. Every morning, he continued to wake up and perform his daily routines, all the way down to kissing his wife goodbye and driving off in the direction of his old office. The only problem is he had nowhere to go. Instead, he was forced to sit in his car and wait out the clock, stewing over his regrets. Sometimes he even stayed late so his family would think he went out drinking with colleagues. You've probably already spotted why this was not suitable for a long-term solution. Soon, Norihiro ran low on funding and he could not afford to maintain the charade any longer. His only options were to come clean and face the music or to simply vanish. Clearly he chose the latter or we wouldn't be talking about him today. But where did he go exactly? Now, it is said there is a place so secretive and shameful that it's been scrubbed from Tokyo's maps, and that place is called Saiia Mauger states that taxi drivers avoid the neighborhood entirely because it's known that only the nameless go there. That being said, it's only fair to report both sides of the story. There are plenty of locals of this area, and they find Mauger's research to be unbelievable. Journalists have called it Tokyo's coolest ghetto. While it was indeed removed from the maps in 1966, the official reason has nothing to do with shame. Its boundaries were merely incorporated into the surrounding districts, which is a fairly common practice all over the world. Today, the area mostly consists of cheap rooms and budget restaurants. Or maybe that's just what they want us to think. Remember, when I said that the number of people that vanish each year would be called into question? Japan's National Police Agency registered about 82,000 missing persons in 2015, with roughly 80,000 being found by the end of the year. Only 23,000 of those were missing for more than a week, and 4,100 of them were found dead. Well, if there's one thing we do have in common with Japanese culture, it's that our conspiracy theories run deep. I assure you though, there's enough material for each side of the argument to have its own series of books. But that's not what today's episode is really about. I just wanted to give you a peek into a fascinating topic that I found while I was just kind of looking around for other stories to cover. And I thought that this would be a phenomenon that you all would love to hear about since you seem to like the missing 411 North American phenomenon. Before we wrap this up, there's one more issue the Time article discussed that I want to make sure isn't confused with the supposed evaporated people phenomenon. There is a very real, very serious danger for women facing domestic abuse. Even in our society, it can be incredibly difficult for some women, and even men, to escape an abusive relationship. But the only way to truly convey what it's like in Japan is to tell you about a woman named Miho Saita. She is the CEO of the Yonengaya TS Corporation, and she helps victims of domestic violence to disappear. Her work and the people that she helps should not be confused with the evaporated people theories. She does not help anyone who is evading law enforcement or involved in illegal activities. What she will do, however, is make sure her clients are more difficult to track down by using a few simple methods such as redirecting mail to a red herring address or creating dummy cell phone contacts. If they're dealing with a stalker, the company will also sweep the house and cars for any tracking devices or bugs. Japan didn't enact its first law against domestic violence until 2001. In 2015, statistics showed 1 in 4 women still suffered from spousal abuse, but some experts argued the numbers were actually far higher. Almost all of Saita's clients come to her after the police fail to act. It's such a common problem that there are books one can purchase to literally have a guide that tells them how to literally disappear on their own and how to be unfindable, basically, and even like ways to afford professional assistance and stuff. It's actually kind of sad. More than 2 decades ago, Saita was forced to escape her own abusive marriage. At the time, she was managing several restaurants, and the police were not allowed to even ask more than a few questions to her abuser. So, obviously, she had to do something. And 99.9% of the time, having the police come say, "Hey, don't do that no more, brother," is not really gonna help out. So eventually, Saita had enough. She took her car and her dog and disappeared. Her struggle inspired her to help other victims of domestic violence escape their own abusive households. And that's how she found her very own company. Each case varies, but depending on how far someone needs to flee and with how much stuff, it can take anything from a few people to an entire crew with moving trucks coming through in the dead of night. At the time of this interview, Saita estimated helping anywhere between 100 and 150 people vanish each and every year. You go, girl. Thank you for your service, and honestly, can't believe that we even have to have this type of stuff in this world, but it is what it is. I do have one more longer case I am going to jump into. I have covered it on the channel before. If you are a very hardcore viewer, you may remember it. But many people are not familiar with it and didn't see that episode, so I'm going to add it on here so you guys can learn a bit more about Japan's missing 411 phenomenon.
This one occurred in the Daisetsuzen National Park, established in December 1934 in the mountainous center of Japan's northern Hokkaido. It's the largest national park in Japan. Its name translates to the Great Snowy Mountains. Before we dive into our actual topic, I want to share an exciting piece of information I discovered in my research. According to a local article, the people of Hokkaido have long revered the Daisetsuzen Mountains as a sacred place. In their native language, it's called Natap Kamoi Sur, which means the mountains towering over the great wetlands. But due to its diverse wildlife and breathtaking views, it is also known by the more affectionate name of God's Playground. A stretch of the park extends across the outer limit of a town called Ba, which is well known for its famous rolling hills. These were created many millions of years ago when the mountains violently erupted, leaving behind volcanic deposits that cooled to form their current scenery. Some of these peaks are still active volcanoes today, such as the one we'll discuss in this episode, Mount Asahidaki, which stands just over 7,500 feet tall, making it the tallest of all 16 peaks. It's located at the park's northern end and features a beautiful hiking trail that is arguably one of the most popular tourist attractions in Daisetsuzen. People travel from all over the world to make this trek, and it's easy to see why. Along the way, landmarks are used as guides. When hikers pass one, it offers reassurance that they are heading in the right direction. The most important of these landmarks is a large boulder named Safe Rock. Its name comes from its resemblance to a safe or a vault, but this landmark has a deadly twin. In the same area sits a second, nearly identical boulder dubbed as False Safe Rock. If someone mistakes it for the real landmark, they will find themselves on a seemingly correct path until realizing they're moving downhill into a swampy valley overgrown with tall, thick bamboo. Once inside, everything is so dense that it becomes difficult to see, and not everyone finds their way back out. The story we're covering today involves multiple lost hikers and a mysterious SOS signal. Everyone knows about SOS signals, right? Just in case you do not, it's a universal code for help. No matter where you are in the world, you can communicate that you're in distress with 3 simple letters. It may sound pretty straightforward, and usually it is, but I promise this time is a bit different. Just settle in and get ready for a lot of twists and turns. To fully appreciate the mystery of the SOS incident, we'll need to begin our story in 1989. 2 hikers went missing on Mount Asahidake. Assuming they followed the wrong trail from False Safe Rock, a police helicopter led the search for the missing men on July 24th. There was no trace of the hikers until just before nightfall when rescuers suddenly spotted a strange SOS sign. Astonishingly, it was made from 19 birch trees that were cut and stacked together, each just over 16 feet long and just under 10 feet wide. They were also placed in a clearing far from the nearest birch trees. Can you imagine what it would take to put something like this together? Seriously, just think about it for just a rational second. It's a relatively important part of the case that will ultimately play a significant role in determining which side you choose. According to online sources and Wikipedia, the searchers quickly turned back to land, and while there was still no sign of the missing hikers. At first. Though hungry and dehydrated, they had no severe injuries and were none the worse for wear, especially considering their circumstances. They were given food and water on the way to the hospital where they could fully recover. When officers later praised them for making such a clever SOS sign, without which they indeed would not have been found, the hikers had no clue what they were actually talking about. This was completely unexpected. If they had not made the sign, then that begs the obvious question, who the heck did? I want to note here that some accounts vary as to whether or not this conversation happened in the helicopter or while the 2 men recovered in the hospital. The details are a little bit lost in translation, so I do apologize. Regardless, it was quickly confirmed that the rescued hikers had not in fact made the SOS sign. They weren't even aware that it had existed. Then came the chilling realization that if these 2 hikers had not made the sign, someone else clearly had. Someone who is still down there, potentially needing help. Before we move on to the next search, can we take a moment to appreciate what an insane stroke of luck this was for our 2 missing hikers who did make it out alive though? Without even knowing the sign was there, they just happened to be close enough to reach the investigating rescuers. And had anything gone differently that day, it's possible the sign wouldn't have been discovered at all. Don't forget, they only found it just before nightfall. Given the late hour, the search party could not return until the following morning, but it was back in full force at daybreak. Kenji Iwamura. The SOS sign was located 2.5 miles away from the peak of Asahidake. and an extensive search of the area was conducted. It wasn't long before a gruesome discovery was made as the authorities began collecting bones scattered around the sign. They were old, broken, and bore traces of animal bites, some of which may have occurred while the victim was even still living. Then, in a separate area, but still within a few hundred feet of the sign, police discovered a hole just large enough to fit a single person inside. It contained an unusual assortment of items, such as amulets, a human skull, a tripod, 2 cameras, a notebook, and a pair of men's basketball shoes. But the most important discoveries were concealed within a backpack. They were a tape recorder with 4 cassettes and a driver's license belonging to Kenji, a 25-year-old office worker from Aichi Prefecture, and had been missing since July 10, 1984. Kenji had set out on his own hike up Mount Asahidake, but when he failed to appear for work a week later, his parents reported him as missing. Unfortunately, no trace of Kenji was ever found until this discovery, 5 years later. At first, the cassette tapes seemed to feature nothing more than theme songs of the time's popular anime, but once listening, the authorities made another unbelievable discovery. Kenji recorded a final message over part of one of the tape's original contents, a statement in which he desperately begs for help that will never arrive. Even though the message was recorded in Japanese, the man's panic and desperation transcends any language barrier. The original clip is said to be over 2 minutes long, but the part of the message that translates to, "I'm on a cliff and can't move. SOS, help me. I'm at the spot where I first saw the helicopter. The bamboo grass is too deep, and I can't go anywhere. Please lift me from here." Now, considering the message specifically said SOS, you may presume he was the one to create the sign, and maybe he was. But this theory has several problems. First, however, we'll get through the official story, and then we'll break down all of the discrepancies at the end. Before we move on though, I will play a quick snippet of the part that I just translated for you so you can hear the actual desperation yourself in the voice. As for the human remains, the skull seemed to fit with the bones found earlier in the day, and everything was transferred to Asahikawa Medical University for examination. Honestly, this was just protocol at that point. The apparent conclusion is that the remains belonged to Kenji, and again, maybe they do, but initially medical reports determined it would be a woman between the age of 20 to 40 years old with type O blood. These findings would only be corrected when this incident began to attract the wrong kind of attention. In the days it took to reach this conclusion, the world fell in love with the story. Everyone followed it closely, hanging on to every detail. The sheer ingenuity behind the sign was impressive enough. I mean, experts estimated it would take at least 2 days and considerably more effort than a weak, possibly starving man would have. But that's one of the things we'll come back to. Authorities were able to confirm Kenji owned specific items in the backpack, such as the anime cassette tapes, and that he wore the same size shoes as the ones found in the hole. It's understandable how one would conclude that these remains belonged to Kenji, but when those results came back, and suddenly it was much more difficult to accept that this was a neatly closed case. Investigators wanted to believe there were 2 men and a woman involved, but there was no record of a missing female, and Kenji was known to be alone when he ventured up the mountain. Plus, if he had met someone along the way, doesn't it seem likely he would have indicated others were also in need of rescue when he was recording the request to be airlifted off the cliff? Many were beginning to feel that Kenji's mention of the SOS was more likely to be a coincidence. We'll probably never know for sure, but these questions led to a great confusion in the investigation and the media coverage. The more Japanese officials insisted the case was solved, the more backlash they would initially receive. Now we're going to move on to some more conspiracy-filled theories, since all the information we actually have is kind of dried up at this point. To the world's great surprise, on February 28, 1990, the Asahikawa East Police Station announced a complete re-examination of the remains had been performed, and new findings concluded they belonged to a male with type A blood, or in other words, Kenji. Make of that what you will. It feels a bit, suspicious to me. The Japanese aren't exactly known for being open and honest with their investigations, but it's only fair to hear both sides. And a Reed Cash article does report that mistakes on such a grand scale can happen often enough in medical universities. At the very least, it's not impossible, you know? So let's take a closer look at the sign itself instead. Today, this story is considered one of the more excellent internet mystery classics, and the ingenuity behind the sign is one of the main reasons that people are so obsessed with this. When it was constructed, the only thing we can say for certain is that the Japan Forest Agency and the Japan Geographical Authority checked previous aerial photos taken in September 1987. They could confirm the sign was already there. They also studied records from 1982, but these photographs lacked the enormous SOS signal. Experts estimated it was likely at least 2 days and significantly more energy than a weak, possibly starving man would even possess. Each of the 19 logs seemed to have been cut with an axe, yet no axe or any such cutting tool has ever been recovered from the site. Does that mean one doesn't exist? No, of course not. But the area has been thoroughly searched on multiple occasions. Oddly, it would be the only item to remain lost. Plus, don't forget how big the logs themselves were. 16 feet long and 10 feet wide sections of birch tree must weigh several hundred pounds. Maybe closer to 1,000 if you want to be realistic. I find it challenging to believe Kenji would be able to drag such sections of wood into the clearing, especially when the autopsy report specifically described him as very frail. It would have been quite literally impossible for him to do alone. As for why Kenji would specifically mention SOS in the recording, one interesting observation made by anime fans is that Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy features a famous scene in which fallen trees are arranged into the shape of an SOS, or perhaps, unlike the two missing hikers, Kenji had previously seen the enormous sign, and it was simply on his mind. Either way, it's widely accepted that he recorded these messages intending to play them back for rescuers should he be discovered after becoming too debilitated to speak. Now, assumably, batteries would last longer than your own lung capacity. Those who disagree with this theory do believe the tape recorder was switched on by accident while the man was screaming for help. But I disagree. His message was exact, as it's giving somebody a specific instruction. It's not mindless cries for help. Of course, some question whether the man in the recording is Kenji or not as well. When his parents heard the recording, they could not confirm it was their son's voice. Is it because it wasn't their son, or is it because grieving parents have a hard time accepting the loss of a child? It's also worth noting that the sound quality of the cassette tape isn't exactly what we're used to hearing today. While yes, the cassettes were in pretty good condition and played rather fine, there's only so much a cassette recorder can do for a desperate, panicked man trying to record what he knows may be his last message. Furthermore, according to Kenji, he was trapped atop a cliff, needing to be airlifted out, but yet his bones were discovered out in the open. It's speculated he eventually reached a point where he simply wanted to descend the mountain any way possible, but when he climbed down to this last cliffside, he could not proceed any further or turn back. However, this argument is often met with the fact that Kenji could have easily changed his mind after recording the message. Eventually, he would have accepted the helicopter wasn't returning, and at that point he may have become desperate enough to continue his descent. Though this leaves us with even more questions. Would he have had enough energy to undertake such a task and constructing that sign? Primarily, if the climb down was responsible for his fractured bones, one fracture was found on a leg bone and the other was in his upper body. With all that said, that's still not the end of it. What about Mother Nature herself? We know this sign already existed in September of 1987, but how long can something like that sit out in the open elements without suffering overgrowth? How can it endure the extreme mountain weather conditions of heavy snow and rain yet still be perfectly visible for such an extended period? Investigators only stated that the logs looked too old and were partially submerged in mud. Is it more likely that someone constructed the sign after Kenji's death but before the two missing hikers in 1989? Because there are still plenty who believe Kenji is still responsible despite these contradictions. And unfortunately with that, there's not too much more I can cover without kind of running in circles and just covering theories that kind of are based off other theories, and, I don't want to waste our time. So with that, what do you guys think is going on here? Maybe it's not the pretty staggering evidence that it seems to be at first glance. What do you think? Did Kenji make the sign, or did someone come along after him? Did the bones actually belong to a missing woman, or are they actually Kenji's? Were Kenji's bones never found? Could those body parts be less of a match than we thought? Did the medical university receive 2 different results based on which bone was tested? Let's hope the mistakes weren't taken that far, right? Seriously, this was actually a very fascinating case to research, and I highly recommend viewing the articles for yourself if you want to learn more. But first, you have to let me know what you think in the comments. Shrek will be angry if you don't, of course. We gotta stay safe out here in these swampy streets. While you're at it, be sure to slap that like button, be sure to subscribe if you're new, and turn on notifications as I upload brand new videos nearly every day on cases just like this. Thank you guys, as always. This was definitely one of the more interesting ones. I'm having a lot of fun jumping over into the international waters, and translating things can be a little tough, but hopefully we're doing a good job over here and you're enjoying them. I'll see you all soon with another creepy episode.
When a child goes missing, there seems to be an almost tangible feeling of distress in the air. To me, it is almost unimaginable to know not only young adults and the elderly go missing in our state and national parks across North America. I had the idea to look into these cases revolving around children after I covered the case of Bryce Herta in the Washington disappearances video. The mass number of missing children will blow your mind. Today, I am only covering but a handful of unsolved cases of children missing in our state and national parks, but I encourage you all to research more into these cases if you have the extra time. Number 1. Nileen K. Marshall, Helena National Forest. Montana is a fairly big state that is home to the Elkhorn Mountains, surrounded by the dense Helena National Forest. On June 25, 1983, Nileen Marshall and her family were having a nice family picnic in the Helena National Forest. Nileen was playing with other children around the picnic area, but at around 4 p.m., Nileen was nowhere to be found. Family and friends searched the area up and down to no avail. Friends said they last seen Nileen sitting alone by Maupine Creek, which was known to have a few beaver dams. Again, family and friends searched the area, leaving no stone unturned, with no clues or indication of Nileen's whereabouts. Authorities questioned Nileen's family about the strange disappearance. After interviewing the entire family, investigators did see Nileen's stepfather as a potential person of interest. Unfortunately, it was reported that Nileen's mother had died in Mexico around 1995. Allegedly, she was killed via sexual assault. To make this case even more dark and twisted, an unknown man wearing a jogging suit was reported to be seen in the area shortly after Nileen went missing. It is alleged, now take this with a grain of salt, that this man told Nileen to follow the shadow. It's not known if this has any real relevance to the case or not, but is definitely an odd detail worth mentioning. Sometime around November of 1985, an anonymous caller called in to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on multiple occasions saying that he was the one who had abducted Nileen. Apparently, police were able to track the calls to various phone booths in the Edgerton, Wisconsin area, but after identifying the location of the calls, the police seemed to drop the case and the calls ceased. Fast forward to January 1986. Another anonymous person submits a typewritten letter saying he abducted a little girl named Kay, which is Nileen's middle name. He mentioned he picked her up on a road in Elkhorn Park between Helena and Boulder, Montana, and had decided to take her home with him. The letter was mailed from Madison, Wisconsin, which is only about 30 miles northwest of Edgerton. The anonymous person also detailed parts of Nileen's case that weren't public. Within this letter, he went on to explain he made a substantial income, worked from home, and took great care of Kay. He even homeschooled her and took her on various trips all over the country. He said he loved the child and she was happy, and that although he knew her family was missing her, he could not let her go. After this letter though, no one has ever heard from this anonymous man again. Nileen has never been found either. What makes this case so odd is that no one actually knows who the anonymous man was and if he ever had anything to do with Nileen's disappearance at all. He did have a few details most people shouldn't know, but there just seems to be too many inconsistencies in location, timeline, and testimony. It could very well be possible that Nileen simply wandered away from her family and fell victim to the unforgiving wilderness. Maybe we'll never know what happened to Nileen Marshall. Hopefully, though, she is at peace, wherever she is. Number 2. Kurt Ronald Newton, Chain of Ponds Park. Kurt Newton was just 4 years old at the time of his strange disappearance. In September 1975, Kurt and his family were visiting the Natanis Point campground in the Chains of Ponds Park area in Maine. Kurt was accompanied by his parents, older sister, and 3 other families also from his hometown of Manchester, Maine. Kurt was last seen playing with his tricycle near his family's campsite when he suddenly disappeared somewhere between the times of 10 and 10:30 a.m. Kurt's family immediately went into worry mode, as Kurt was rather shy and didn't wander off from his mother too often. He also has no history of running off by himself either. An extensive search was conducted, in which they found his tricycle at a dump site 8/10 of a mile from his family's campsite. With the discovery of the tricycle, panic definitely set in. The woods were searched with bloodhounds and multiple military-grade helicopters. It is described as the largest search in Maine's history. Even with all these resources though, no sign of Kurt Newton was found. Police thought that he may have become confused while trying to find his way back to the campsite and went in the wrong direction, possibly making himself even more lost in the process. Making things even worse, temperatures in the area dropped below freezing that same night Kurt went missing. Surviving that harsh weather without any of the right gear and equipment would prove fatal for a 4-year-old. Kurt's parents, however, believe in something a bit different from the police's thoughts. They believe Kurt was abducted by someone who took him across the Canadian border, which is only around 6 miles away from their campsite, so it is plausible. Years and years went by, and Kurt's family sent out thousands of posters with his picture to school districts all over the United States and Canada in hopes that if he was abducted, someone would recognize him. Plenty of sightings were reported, but, sadly, none of them have ever led investigators to any answers. Kurt Newton, until this day, has never been found and is considered another lost soul to the forest. Number 3. Dennis Lloyd Martin, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis and his father were visiting the Great Smoky Mountains National Park with his grandfather, older brother, and 2 cousins on June 14, 1969. Dennis and his family lived in Knoxville, Tennessee at the time. Being someone who has lived in the area myself, I can tell you the hike they took from the Cades Cove area to Russell Field is a beautiful one, stretching about 10 miles. Dennis and his folks set up camp around the Spence Field area. Dennis, his older brother, and 2 cousins were playing hide-and-seek between 2 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. This would seemingly be the last time Dennis Martin would ever be seen. He was last seen hiding behind a bush in a park near the Appalachian Trail. Dennis's family reported him missing and a large-scale search for him began to take place. Over 1,400 volunteers came together to find the missing boy. This was by far the largest, most extensive search ever conducted by the park. To make a bad situation worse though, heavy rains plagued the search over the next couple of days. No evidence of Dennis was ever located. Jumping to 1985, a ginseng hunter claimed he stumbled upon what could be skeletal remains of a child in the Tremont Big Hollow. The hunter claimed to actually have seen the bones multiple times but didn't report anything for fear of being blamed. Oddly enough, when the officials checked the area the hunter claimed the remains were in, they found nothing at all. A few more facts that may help us in this case is Dennis was a special education student. He was healthy and described as being a husky boy who loved to hike and camp. He wasn't known to be fearful of new things. Dennis Martin's case, till this day, remains unsolved.
There is a phenomenon that is seemingly spreading like the plague through state, national, and provincial parks across North America. Thousands of people ranging from tourists to experienced outdoorsmen are seemingly up and vanishing into thin air. Despite all the best efforts of search teams, it seems no amount of technology can explain where these people are going. Today, I am covering 3 more disappearances that have gone unsolved until this very day. These cases have some truly strange and odd details about them, classifying them under the missing 411.
Number 1. Emerson Carbof. Robertsdale, Pennsylvania is like most small towns in America. It seems not much out of the norm happens here. Founded in 1872, the town was a key part in the construction of the East Broad Top Railroad and Coal Company's mining location. The town was created to house the workers and families of the mines and railroad. Fast forward to afternoon of November 11th of 1985. Emerson Carbof and his brother-in-law Ralph Issett set out to hunt turkey in the mountains of Robertsdale. They usually used an old logging road to get to the location, which was an empty field off the side of the road. At around 2 p.m., the 2 men split up, each taking a different path through the woods. At this point, it had begun to lightly rain, potentially causing the surroundings to change. The men had agreed to meet back with each other at a later time. Later that day, Ralph emerged from the forest and noticed Emerson was not yet there. So, he waited for some time, but, with light quickly fading, he thought Emerson may have gotten lost. Ralph then began to fire off half a dozen rounds from his gun into the air, hoping Emerson would hear the gunfire and follow it back to safety. Despite his efforts, no one has ever seen Emerson Carbof again. It was too dark to already go searching that evening, but a search party was formed the next day at a nearby volunteer fire station. For nearly 2 full weeks, search teams searched over 12 square miles of the woods, with 1,800 or more volunteers. Search teams worked up and down the entire landscape, while little to nothing was turned up. Almost as if Emerson, like many cases, just vanished. 2 different types of search dogs were brought in, as well as a scuba diver team, and as well as helicopters with heat-sensing FLIR technology. Sadly, the search was called off after no sign of Emerson was found anywhere. In what some call a cruel prank, Ida Carbof, Emerson's wife, was contacted in 2004. Someone was claiming to have information about what had happened to him. As always, take this source with a grain of salt, but the contact claimed Emerson had been killed and buried on a farm in the Robertsdale area. The contact also claimed to have accidentally found a bone on the farm, which was turned over to the state police, along with any other information the person possessed. The state police turned the bone over to Pennsylvania DNA lab in Greensburg, but the bone was so small and degraded, it was almost impossible to be used to extract any DNA from it. Till this day, Emerson Carbof has yet to be found. Number 2. Garen Kirk. Unlike 99% of these missing 411 type cases, they usually have little to no footage available from the search. But this case luckily has a dedicated group of family and friends who documented their work.
Yeah, search and rescue came out and they did a really excellent job. It was one of the largest searches in Oregon's history. At one point we had almost 200 searchers out here doing very thorough grid searching of the woods, but we still have the only sign of my brother has been his car in the parking lot of the Frog Lake campground.
Garen Kirk was 31 years of age at the time of his sudden disappearance. Kirk was an experienced outdoorsman who often took solo trips into the woods for many days at a time. On December 3rd, 2014, like many times before, Kirk left to the Mount Hood National Forest. This was only meant to be a 3-day trip, seeing as Kirk had planned to return on the 6th of December. Kirk's sister, Whitney Altman, filed a missing person report on Sunday, December 7th, when her brother did not return home. Unfortunately, Kirk did not give his family much detail about this trip. This delayed any search being conducted until Monday because search and rescue crews couldn't be dispatched until the vehicle was located to establish a starting point for the teams to work off of. Kirk was working hard on his schooling. He had recently transferred his credits and completed his first term of online courses with National University and had planned to finish his bachelor's and move on to a master's eventually. Kirk was the father of a 5-year-old girl named Gabriella, who he had joint custody with his ex-wife Kristen. Some people have speculated Kirk could have been running from his responsibilities, but nothing really seems to back that theory up. It seems unlikely to leave your hard work, daughter, and family behind over some stress, so I really don't think we should be spreading that rumor too much. Kirk's car, a gold Pontiac Grand Am, was found in the parking lot at Frog Lake Campground off of US 26 on the 8th of December. With this new discovery, search teams heavily searched the wooded areas nearby. Officials were also able to detect a ping from Kirk's cell phone coming from the southwest direction. The problem with this, though, is it would change the jurisdiction for the search from Clackamas County to Wasco County Police. It was reported that upward of 170 people came to volunteer and help search for the missing outdoorsman. Virtually every foot of the Frog and Twin Lakes area were turned upside down in the search for Kirk. Over the span of 9 days, scent dogs and search drones with heat-detecting infrared participated in trying to locate any sign of the hiker. Despite all of this, though, there was no track of Kirk anywhere. It was like he was just gone. A few odd details to mention before we move on to the next case is after noting the pinging from Kirk's cell phone coming from the southwest area, officials seemingly focused their efforts on the northeast area. This could be a mix-up and misreport by media sources, but it has been spread by various sources that I've come across, so I'm not too sure how accurate this could be. If you have a few spare moments, please check out the family's Facebook page dedicated to helping find Garen and others. Facebook.com/inlovingmemory of Garen Kirk. Number 3. Arvin Nelson. Arvin Nelson was 55 years old and an experienced hiker. Nelson began his solo backpacking trip to the Big Sur Station in the Los Padres National Forest on August 6, 2014. He began around the China Camp Trailhead area. A friend of Nelson's dropped him off in the area near Tasahara Road and planned to hike the eastern side of the Ventana Wilderness. Nelson mentioned he was visiting the Pine Ridge Trail, which he has never visited before. He was expected to arrive in the Big Sur Station area sometime on August 14th. After Nelson did not arrive, searchers were notified and they began to search and rescue operations on August 16th in the area. As mentioned previously, Nelson was an experienced hiker and hadn't much trouble in the past with these trails. Nelson's case did not get overlooked though. The National Guard, the U.S. Forest Service, Monterey County Sheriff's deputies, and multiple other agencies all banded together to search for the missing man. The last known sighting of Arvin was on August 6th. A man named Jack English claims to have met Nelson while while staying at his cabin in the Ventana wilderness with his son. They left around 2 days later via helicopter and said Nelson was planning on hiking to the Sykes area on August 10th. Nelson had a lot of food on him and took tons of gear because of the length of time he had planned for his solo hike. This gave the authorities the hope they needed to continue their search for a longer extended period of time than they normally would, as his chances of survival were higher. Unfortunately though, after officials exhausted their resources, they called the search off, and Nelson, unfortunately to this day, has never been found or heard from again. Thanks for watching this video. What do you think is happening to all of these people out in our national and state parks? It seems very odd that people would just seemingly vanish into thin air. Hundreds and hundreds of people coming together to search for one individual seems like it would yield more results, but more often than not, it seems no matter how advanced our technology is, how many people we gather up, and how much miles we cover, it seems that we will not find the missing.